The demise of the hot hatch has to be one of the most baffling things to be happening in recent times, because who doesn't want a car that's small but practical, fast but affordable, and most importantly, ridiculous amounts of fun? Okay, so the Golf GTI and Golf R are soldiering on. The Ioniq 5N has proved electric hatches can work, albeit at a much higher power and price point. The GR Yaris is still magic, and the latest Honda Civic Type R is the boss. But hot hatches, they used to be everywhere, on every street corner, usually wrapped around a lamppost. So is this the new Alpine A290, the car to save the hot hatch? Bit of a lofty setup, admittedly, but if this thing has even a sprinkling of the A110's handling genius, then it could usher in a whole new generation of EV hot hatches, stuff like the Mini JCW EV, the VW ID GTI, introducing the joys of small, nimble, mildly overpowered shopping trolleys to a whole new generation. If you haven't spotted it yet, this is the hot version of the new Renault 5 Super Mini, and the second model from Renault's Alpine Performance sub-brand, following the sublime featherweight A110 sports car, and this is its first full EV. The car we're driving here is the range-topping front-wheel drive 217 brake horsepower GTS, which covers 0 to 60 miles an hour in 6.4 seconds. Quick enough despite weighing 1,479 kilograms, and it promises a range of 236 miles from its 52 kilowatt hour battery. A lower spec GT version with 178 brake horsepower is also available, costing from £33,500, although this GTS model will cost you 38 grand. Okay, so price and performance for a hot hatch this size seem about right, but what about the handling? So if you compare the bump that Alpine gives you with the Renault 5 that this car is based on, you've got new front and rear anti-roll bars, you've got bespoke stiffer settings for the suspension, and you've got hydraulic bump stops, which supposedly improve comfort whilst the stiffer suspension improves handling. And that's the first thing I would say about this car, is that as soon as you get in, it feels grown up, sophisticated, refined. It rides really, really nicely and goes down the road with a heft that you just wouldn't expect, which is probably not a word that you necessarily want to associate with a hot hatch. So let's hope that it accelerates like one. Okay, so 220 horsepower in this day and age, it sounds a little bit puny on paper, doesn't it? But in reality, this car isn't rapid, but it is plenty fast enough. You're not going to be making your passengers and yourself vomit everywhere. You're not going to be breaking any necks. But crucially, for a small hot hatch, you can use full throttle on the public road. You can wring this car's neck. And because it's an EV, it's got really strong acceleration away from low speeds, which is what's going to make it feel fast in sort of urban, busier environments. You can also turn the ESC and traction control off completely via a button down here, which I suggest you do, because when you do that, you get a little bit of scrabble from the front tyres as they try and find grip, a little bit of torque steer, and you get all those lovely old school hot hatch vibes. You also get a decidedly un-old school noise that comes from the car. It's synthetic, of course, but what Alpine say they've done is recorded the actual sound that the motor makes and then cleaned it up and enhanced it, and I actually think it's rather good, because when you keep your foot in, it hardens a bit like a combustion engine, and then when you lift off, it goes back down again, so you do know where you are in the rev range of the electric motor. It's also got a few interesting tricks up its sleeve. I'm going to give you a full tour of the interior. I'm going to show you what all the buttons do and what all the sub menus in here do. But for now, I'm going to focus on this big red button here that says OV. They call it the overtaking button. It's not an overboost button. It doesn't give you extra torque or extra power, but what it does do is give you instant access. It's a switch, effectively, to full throttle. So whatever the conditions, wherever your foot is on the throttle pedal, if you push this red button, you get full throttle. Now, I get that means it's completely pointless because you could just floor the throttle with your foot. But I have to say there is a little bit of novelty to piling into a corner, waiting, and then hitting this button with your thumb, and it will give you 30 seconds of full throttle rather than flooring it with your foot. As I say, completely pointless. I probably shouldn't like this, but secretly I do. What about the steering? Well, to be honest, it's pretty numb. The ratio is quite nicely judged. It's not too quick, especially with the short wheelbase. You don't want the car feeling too lively, but you do get that little bit of kickback through the torque steer, through the front wheel drive, so I'm not going to complain too much. The braking, it's a total brake-by-wire system, by the way. The idea was you want to eradicate that point where regenerative braking hands over to physical hydraulic braking, pads on disc. It's a constant problem with electric cars, if we're honest, but they've done a really nice job here. Not only have I not noticed the point at which that happens, but also there's pretty decent brake feel as well, which is what you want in a hot hatch when you're piling into corners with a little bit too much speed. Which leaves the big question: does this car encourage you to drive like a yob? Does it have proper French hot hatch DNA in it? Well, the first thing I'd say is it weighs 1,500 kilograms. That in itself is fairly commendable because it's 200 kilograms lighter than the equivalent electric Mini Cooper S, but it's still pretty hefty. This thing is never going to drive like a 205 GTI from back in the day, but it does have a really interesting dual personality. You could buy this car and drive it around, you could commute in it, it would be comfortable, it would be swift, it would be refined. It feels like a really expensive, well-developed object. But equally, if you do want to take it by the scruff of the neck and lob it at some corners, well, it handles itself really, really nicely and has that slightly unruly side to it that we all want when it comes to a hot hatch. The DNA is definitely there. Okay, so what do we think about the way this thing looks? I think it looks pretty good, actually. A bit fussy, perhaps. Certainly the Renault 5 has much stronger retro vibes, whereas this thing is going for a more in-your-face kind of performance look. And there are quite a few differences between this and the Renault 5. The most obvious is at the front end, where they've tried to mimic the four lights motif that you get on the A110, but instead of round lights, they've added these X symbols. This is riffing on the tape you used to get on headlights of old rally cars, because of course Alpine has heritage in rally. You've got this emblem on the bonnet now with the Alpine A in it. The whole car is wider, you've got wider tracks, you've got beefier wheel arches and side sills. It only comes with 19-inch wheels. This is one of the designs. The other one is called the Iconic design, I believe, and riffs off the wheels from the A310. They've got squares in the middle of them. Bit of an acquired taste, but pretty cool nonetheless. Coming down the side of the car, you've also got these Renault 5 turbo inspired kind of scallops in the bodywork. And then round the back, you have this ducktail spoiler that runs across the back of the boot. Not sure how much aerodynamic benefit you're getting from that, but it gives it a different look from the back. Boot space, 326 litres, which is pretty good for this class. And the rear seats, well, I can sit behind me, but then I'm only 5'8". The one thing I did notice is that the floor is quite high because you've got the battery underneath you, you've got the skateboard chassis, your knees are quite high up. There's not a lot of space for your feet under the seat in front. But look, this car is not designed to be a people carrier. It's a compact hot hatch. All right then, a tour of the A290's interior. And the first thing I'll start with is these seats. They're bespoke to the Alpine. This top spec GTS model, they're finished in Napa leather. They are, I have to say, really nicely bolstered, super comfortable. They look fantastic. They smell gorgeous. Big thumbs up for the seats. And there's lots of other expensive looking materials around, like this soft touch stitched leather on the dashboard and all sorts of illuminated logos everywhere, along with some weirdly cheap feeling materials like this plastic that surrounds the gear selector bit in this unique center console you get. But that's being a bit unfair, because overall the feeling here is a much more premium car than I thought it was going to be. Although no cup holders, black mark for that. Right, let's get on to the important stuff, the buttons that you can press. In front of you on the wheel, you've got this blue one down here. This is to set your level of regenerative braking. It's 4 levels. You can have it off completely, so when you lift off the throttle, you just coast, or you have 3 further levels above that. Really, the most extreme regen, it's for using around town. It's for one pedal driving. If you don't like using the brake and you prefer just lifting off the throttle, it's an acquired taste. Personally, I quite like it when you're in stop-start traffic. For the most efficient running, if you're A290 EV, you basically want it off when you're going at highway speeds, so you maintain your momentum. This button here is to select your drive mode. So it looks a lot like the mode selector that you get in Porsches these days, except this one doesn't rotate. It would have been nice if it had a nice little clicky action, but it doesn't. You click it to go through your various drive modes. So save mode, that's your most efficient mode if you're limping home with not a lot of battery left. Normal, which is just your everyday settings. Sport, which sharpens everything up. Or Perso, where you can go into the menu here, hit drive mode, hit configure, and set your personal preferences for what you like. So we've got the engine on sport mode, so that's maximum throttle response. You can choose how loud you want the fake engine noise to be. There's 2 different engine noises to choose from. You can choose your steering weight, and you can choose agility control. They talk about it being the pivot point. So if you put the agility control to sport, then the rear end is slightly more mobile. Of course, we've talked about the red overtake button up here. So I'm going to dive into the menus and show you some of the crazy stuff that the Alpine comes with. They call it telemetrics, and it's basically various things. Live data, so you can see in real time exactly how much G you're pulling under acceleration, braking, in the corners. You can see how much power you're using from the electric motors, and also when you hit the brakes, what percentage of the braking is coming from regenerative and what percentage is coming from physical braking, hydraulic. Endurance, that one's about how efficient you're being with your battery. Or track mode, which gives you all sorts of tyre pressures, tyre temperatures, brake temperatures, motor temperatures, and lap times. And we're not done yet, because you can go into a mode called coaching. This is essentially a user manual for how to drive this car properly. I particularly like the one called Manage Vehicle Balance. And if you go into this, click Oversteer with Opposite Lock, there we go. It gives you a little animated diagram and some writing teaching you how to drift your A290. We'll see how easy that is a little later on. And then once you've perfected and you've got all the coaching into your brain, you can hit the challenges. So there's various challenges. Agility, this is how much G can you pull in the corners. Power, can you match the manufacturer's 0 to 60 acceleration times. And endurance, can you be a right old featherfoot and do a bit of hypermiling? Plenty to play with. Speaking of which, let's have a hoon about on track. Okay, here we are then, the Circuit de Mallorca. Not the biggest racetrack on the world, but having said that, it should be quite suited to a little hot hatch like this. And I should just caveat all this by saying, if I was driving a supercar here, this would be a pretty poxy little circuit, but I'm not. I'm driving a 200 horsepower-ish electric hot hatch. So to be honest, it's just about perfect. And let's get the elephant in the room out the way nice and early. And its weight, this thing weighs 1,500 kilograms. You can feel it straight away, but it does feel small and compact and pretty agile. And as you can see, I'm taking total liberties with the curbing because it's a hot hatch, and that's what you're supposed to do in a hot hatch. Bung it in here, and you can see there, it does rotate. It does rotate when you give it the big bung and lift off. That, to be fair, is understeer. And that, in a lovely screechy demonstration, is what's going on in this car. You're trying to manage that weight. So they have tuned it really nicely. Straight away you can feel that they've bred some agility into this car, that they've made the rear axle feel more agile than the front. But you see that? Turn in nice and sharp. Tell the car what you want to do. And to be fair, the rear axle does come round. And we're not talking about fake drift modes here like you get in four-wheel drive hot hatches. This is proper weight management. This is the car trying to make the absolute most of the grip that's available to it. Let's give it a boost out of this corner. Boost button. Yes, I like accelerating with my thumb. Don't know why. Let me give it a bung into here. And you can see, and it is up for a play. But this is a company that knows how to make playful cars. It's Renault, right? They've made some of the greatest hot hatches ever made. And you know, with this new brand Alpine, this is only their second ever car, that they're taking this seriously. They know that this car needs to be good, and they've gone all out to extract all the playfulness, all the agility they possibly can from this chassis. And I have to say, for what it is, for the fact that nobody is going to be taking this on track, it's a good job. I can smell the brakes. So, conclusion time. Do pocket rocket hot hatch EVs like this actually work? Surprise, surprise, it's a bit out of its depth on the racetrack, but what that proved is that there's proper playfulness baked into this car. It's been designed and engineered and tuned by people who know what a proper hot hatch should be. I think comparing this to, say, Clio Renault Sports of old is a bit of a pointless exercise because this weighs so much more. There's no gears to shift. It's a completely different experience, but that experience is a good one. This car handles fantastically, especially on the road. It's got gadgets to play with. It looks great. It's well priced. For me, it's a big hit, but there's one problem. This is a fun little road car, but then so is the standard Renault 5, and you can get one of those for 10 grand less.